Hello kind people, this is Svidler for Chess24 with the highlight video for round 8 of the Tata Steel 2019 tournament in Wijk and for this video the choice was rather wide. It has been a very decisive round. There has been 4 wins, all 4 of them it could have been potentially game of the day, I feel. And eventually we split the duty again with Jan. Jan took the game Magnus Carlsen played today, and I am covering the game the young Polish hotshot Jan-Krzysztof Duda played against Vladimir Kramnik. It is once again just as it was yesterday with the game Rajabov won against Vidit. A very, very difficult, very sharply tactical game. So I think instead of introing for another 3 minutes, we should start looking at chess so that it's not going to go too long. In terms of the way the tournament has been going, neither of them would have too many reasons to be excited about their tournament results up to that point. But in particular, Kramnik had a very poor tournament in terms of results. Prior to that game, -3, no victories, really horribly going event for him. And as usual these days, he just doesn't stop. I don't think he even thinks about trying to stop the bleeding and maybe play a careful game somewhere instead of going all out for a win with both colors, and today was no exception. Duda played e4, Kramnik replied with e5, knight f3, knight c6, as usual. No Berlin for him today. Bishop c4, bishop c5, d3, knight f6, c3, sorry, castles first, d6, c3, and Kramnik played a6 here. I am really not the person to try and explain to you the intricacies of all kinds of Gioco Piano move orders these days. But I will point out that in this very tournament there was a game between Jordan van Foreest and Ding Liren, in which after castles rook e1, Ding Liren played a5, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3 and knight h7. This is a position Ding Liren has been playing quite consistently with black. He played bishop a7 here against MVL late last year. The game he finally lost after 100 games unbeaten, and knight h7 was his proposed improvement, and he won a very interesting messy game. This is kind of relevant because despite Kramnik playing a6 here, which is very different to those positions in terms of structure, play started looking a lot like that game very soon. a4 played by Duda, castles, and here just bishop g5. Not going for positional play. There have been games in this tournament already where white played knight bd2 here or rook e1, and black has this plan of h6, rook e8, bishop e6. Kramnik himself also had this on the black side, but not today. Today Duda goes bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3. And here, knight h7 has not been played immediately because, once again, it does allow d3, d4 here as an option, just as Jordan van Foreest played in this position. So, black sidesteps this move by playing bishop a7 first. As a brief theoretical discussion, well, not discussion, but just to give you an overview what people have been doing here, without going too much into detail, there had been a recent game in which Pierun played g4 here, and after knight h4, knight h5 against David Navarra, and had a very decent, a very playable position. So this option also exists and makes a decent amount of sense. And after bishop a7, there was a game between Wesley So and Vishy Anand in which Wesley played knight a2 with the idea of playing knight c2 and then pushing for some d4 ideas later on. He was completely winning at some point, but failed to win that game. Knight bd2, which is what Duda played against Kramnik, is also a very, very well-known game. Some black players choose to play king g7 here. In particular, there was a game which Wesley So won against Veselin Topalov in the line after rook e1, bishop e6, And after rook e1, knight h7 has been played by Peter Leko against Jørgen van Foreest in one of the Isle of Man tournaments, leading to a huge mess once again. But Ding Liren plays knight h7 immediately, which is also far from a novelty. It has been played a number of occasions by very, very strong players, including Ding Liren in this position as well. And White has a number of options here. The move h3 that Duda played is also reasonably well known. White also tried playing king h1 first, to which Black normally replies by king h8, indicating that apart from the plan of h5, h4, he also has a very simple plan of just playing f5. And in the Batumi Olympiad, for instance, a game between Igor Kovalenko and Bassem Amin went before h5, h4, g4, knight h2, f5, e takes, knight e7, and Black is already, you could make an argument, better / winning here. This is really not a good position for White to find himself in at all. And for instance, as an attempt to avoid it, Dariusz Švirić played d3, d4 here, just sacrificing this pawn to open up a center. And this is actually a very a typical thing White does in this line, just offers this pawn in a number of ways to Black. Black can just take twice, Black can include g5, g4 at any point. But White wants diagonals for his bishops, and also he wants to have the option of playing f2, f4 at some point, because to pick up the pawn on d4, Black needs to either exchange or drive away the knight from f3. h3 is a bit more quiet though. Ding played king h8 in this position in his game against Salem in the Sharjah Grand Prix in 2017 and won a very nice game. But h5 is also quite logical. Black wants to play h4, then g4, or the immediate g4 maybe in some positions as well. So not a surprising move as such. Duda replies by the immediate d3, d4. As usual, White tries to fight for the center as early and as hard as possible. Kramnik replies with h4, which is what we expected, but it's notable that Black can play g4 straight away. And this leads to a very curious position where White plays bishop h4, forcing Black to make a very awkward looking move, queen d7. And in this position you can play knight h2 with a huge mess, but the computer after some thought just leaves the knight on f3 and plays rook e1. And I just wanted to show you this idea and show you how sharp and how non-standard play becomes in these lines very often. White just says, okay, your pieces are so poorly positioned and so miscoordinated that I am very much willing to give you this this knight for basically just piece activity. If Black takes, White takes with the knight, not even the queen, and then plays knight g5 and attempts to take the pawn on h5 and basically deliver mate, because there will be further ideas of rook lifts via e3 and g3. And after rook e1, the machine says king h8, and it's an ungodly mess, which is very difficult to assess, so we shouldn't really spend too much time on it. h4 was played by Kramnik, bishop h2, g4 takes, bishop takes g4. All of this is also quite similar to what happened in the Van Foreest Ding game. There, Black also achieved this kind of a setup on the king side very early on. Duda takes on e5. And from this moment on, in particular, I think the next reply is also very indicative of how Kramnik plays chess these days. Because if you take on e5 with the knight, which should generally be your first instinct, because if you take with the pawn, you're once again left with this really awkward knight on c6, which is not doing very much, and you will have to spend quite a lot of time bringing it over to some decent squares. By taking with the knight, you create some immediate threats, and also you make your further play a lot simpler. And after bishop e2, you can take on f3, and after both bishop takes f3, bishop e6, and knight takes f3, and in this position you are advised to play rook e8. A very curious variation appears if Black plays h3 here. White goes knight d4, attacking the bishop on g4. Bishop e2, queen e2 is playable, but seems to be slightly better for White. But the curious situation arises if Black plays bishop d7, which looks very natural at first glance. And here, after some thought, the computer says that the move g2, g4, and then after rook e8, f2, f3 gives White a very large advantage, because it stops the immediate counterplay on the king side. It's still very difficult, I believe, to make yourself play like this, but the computer doesn't have those problems and just says white is now much better. But if instead of this you play rook e8, black is just fine. Once again, there's really no need to go into too much detail here, but this is very playable. Therefore, by playing knight takes e5, Kramnik could get himself a very, very decent game, justifying his previous play, but also making it a lot easier for white to trade a lot of pieces and generally remove most of the risk from the position. Which is why I think knight takes e5 didn't even occupy Kramnik's thoughts very much. And d5 is a lot sharper, but also a lot more challenging in terms of not making mistakes. Duda plays b4, which is, it looked, I was surprised by this move during the live broadcast, because it seemed to me like black is actually achieving something on the king side, and you never have enough time for this. But the machine says everything else is vastly inferior to this move, and this is by far the best move in the position. Just creating a very simple idea of playing b5 and picking up the pawn on e5. And Kramnik here made a very large mistake, but a mistake which could only be punished by a very striking idea, which we kind of stumbled on by mistake during the live show, because chat started telling us that the move Kramnik made is a mistake, and gave us some further hints, but no line that would explain what they meant. And the hints were such that I managed to figure it out from the third try, but it's not easy to find in actual life. Kramnik played h3, which is a very, very natural move in this position. You want to continue opening up the white's king position, and obviously if you force white to play g3, this construction is absolutely horrible. But it turns out that what you're opening on the king side is your own king, not the king on g1. And h3 would have more or less lost to g takes h3, bishop takes h3, and king h1. Just leaving the rook on f1 attacked, and if black takes, white takes, and then this queen goes to h3, the rook aims to arrive on g1, and the black position just collapses because his pieces are completely discoordinated, and white has a lot of attacking pieces basically aimed at the king, and more will be coming in the near future. And if black tries not to take and goes king h8 first, to my surprise, the machine says the simplest way to go about things here is just to play queen e2, bishop f1, rook f1. You do have to take now, because allowing rook g1, now that the pawn f2 is protected, is completely unthinkable. And if you give the machine some time here to consider things, it starts saying black is close to lost, which is a bit surprising at first glance, but then you start realizing just how strong the white pieces are and how weak the pawn on e5 is, and once it falls, many things will fall with it. Instead of h3 after b4, black had two very playable moves. A very weird slow move rook e8, with the intention of meeting b5 as knight a5. And a sample line can go something according along the lines of king h1, queen f6, b5, knight a5, bishop e2, rook a d8. It seems like black is doing very well, and now the machine says it's time to start ditching some material. White takes on e5, takes, black picks up all this material, white goes f4, queen takes c3, and simply rook a d1. And material balance is very much in favor of black here. He has two pieces for the rook and no pawns. But this collection of ragtag individual pieces, which really aren't doing a lot to work together, is so disharmonious that even, let's say, an endgame after queen g3, e5, h3, knight e4, despite, as I mentioned, the huge material imbalance in black's favor, is very safe for white. Probably black doesn't lose, but very, very safe for white. And apart from rook e8, black could also make the move knight g5, which is also quite normal in these types of positions. White goes b5, black goes knight e7. Now you have to unpin yourself with bishop e2. And now, after both bishop takes f3 and knight takes f3, black probably holds this position. I'm not sure which one I like better, but they both appear to be very, very playable. But once again, in order not to make this video an hour long, I will leave you with this knowledge. and not go too deep into the differences between knight f3 and bishop f3 here. As mentioned, black played h3, and Duda did not play g takes h3. He played b5, which is part of his plan. And here, people were saying that the move Kramnik made loses, and he should have played knight a5. But objectively, after knight a5, bishop e2, he would have been in a lot of trouble anyway. And the lines always are very, very similar to one another. If black goes rook e8 here, trying to keep things sort of under control, the machine suggests that, first of all, a really weird looking move king h1 is very, very strong, forcing black more or less to take on g2, and then aiming to play a rook g1, and in some cases even king f1, followed by bishop h3 check and king e1. For instance, there's this line, queen f6, rook g1, king h8, and here the king actually walks all the way to e1. This is incredibly bizarre. And it feels a lot safer on e1 than it ever did on g1. And then white switches to attack by playing, let's say, bishop g3, rook h1, and reminding black that his king is still on the open h file. But also, if you want to play human moves, you can take on e5 here. Black goes knight g5, you go bishop g3, and once again give up this exchange. And after some thought, the machine starts saying this is just horrible for black, because once again, these two guys just don't participate in the game, and the king on g8 is basically fatally weak here. So I think knight a5 doesn't equalize. Knight e7 more or less loses though, but it loses to a very, very specific set of moves, which is extremely difficult to find, I think, in practical play. Duda started very well. He took on h3, bishop takes h3, took on e5. This is correct. It's also worth noting that in many of these positions, including I think this one, and also there will be a particularly strange one later on, the machine suggests that b takes a6 is a very good inclusion, because apparently including ba improves some variation later on. I don't even really necessarily care which one, because I don't think anybody goes b takes a6 in this position. For instance, allowing black to play knight g6 and make a mess on the board, even if it's not mathematically correct. So gh, bishop takes h3, knight takes e5. If black plays knight g6 here, creating a rather simplistic trap of knight takes g6, queen g5 check, and black actually breaks through and gives mate. After knight g6, white wins. The easiest way to win is just very prosaic. You play queen h5, knight takes e5, queen takes h3, and whichever light piece black takes, white takes the other one. And a position like this, white is a pawn up and also has two bishops, better structure, and he will be the side attacking on the king side. So more or less lost position for black. Kramnik though played king g7 very, very quickly, and very, very quickly is a notable thing here, because both of them were in tremendous amount of time trouble by this point. The moves up to this point were very, very difficult and took a lot of time for both of them. And here Duda made a move which I think objectively should lead to a draw. What's more, it should lead to a draw in two different ways, but not easy ways, either of them. And the computer suggests that there are two ways for white to win this position, and this is the one of the ways to win this position, apparently, is to play ba. And once again, I just, in my PGN in front of me, ba6, there are no moves afterwards. It just says ba6, yeah, right. And I would like to share this with you, because that would be my attitude towards, you know, anyone suggesting move b takes a6 in this position. I don't think you can make this move in a practical game. It just makes no sense. Once again, after knight g6, there is a threat of queen g5 giving mate on the other side of the board, and you just have to believe with all your heart that b takes a6 is more important than whatever it is that you're doing on the king side. I don't think it's possible. The other line, I'm sure Duda tried to calculate, but there is a twist at the end of it, which I think is, once again, it's inhuman to find in practical terms. After king g7, he could have played queen h5. I'm sure he considered this move. Bishop takes f1 is the only move that makes any sense. Knight takes f1. Black has to play knight g6 because the pawn f7 is hanging. It also creates threat of queen g5 check, obviously. And here white goes knight g3, re-establishing the threat of knight f5 check. Black plays queen g5, pinning the knight for the time being. White actually trades the queens off, goes knight f5 check, king h7. And here white goes king g2. This you can sort of understand. White wants to play a rook h1 and just give mate to this king on h7 because basically all of his pieces are participating in the attack. But when knight takes e4, you actually have to see the option of playing knight e5 g4. And if you somehow reach this position in your analysis, it's possible you will figure out just how winning you are, even though it's not a given. The point is, you would like to play rook h1, but black has knight takes f2 here, and he is suddenly even winning, because white no longer will have any threats. But after knight g4, there's really no way to stop either rook f1, rook h1, or also a very strong threat of bishop d5, trying to drive the knight from c3 away, and then white goes knight f6 check. And only after all that, he goes rook h1, and then just gives mate along the h file. And this is just completely lost for black. Even very cursory analysis of this position confirms that white wins very comfortably. But when you calculate all this starting from king g7, and you also have something like maybe 10 minutes on the clock, you stop somewhere around here and you say to yourself, this looks attractive, but I am an exchange down, and if it doesn't come off, it might not be good at all. And you stop and you play something else. In particular, if you see something else which is quite attractive. And Duda played something which is very, very challenging. He took on f7, black has to take, took on f7 again. Black more or less has to take on f1 because king takes f7, obviously queen h5 check. This is horrible for black. And a quiet move bishop b3, re-establishing the threat of taking simply on f1, and also creating a very large threat of bishop b5 check. And both of them were very, very short on time at this point. And Kramnik made objectively, I think, the best move in the position, and also the most natural move in the position, which is bishop h3. But it's also worth noting that the move knight g6, which aims not to give white any initiative, and to just play a position where, yes, black will be 2 pawns down, but black will be doing all the running, is also, I think, objectively closer to a draw than it is to a white victory. White has to take with the knight, black goes queen g5 check. The best move here is king h1. If you start with knight g3, black goes rook d8, and after queen h5, black goes simply rook d3, queen g5, knight g5, and the black pieces are so active that the machine, despite white being 2 pawns up with a move, suggests that black just holds this very comfortably. So king h1, and here, just to give you the example of how stupid this position is, after knight f6, knight g3 and knight g4, white is actually winning after rook a2, but rook a2 is strictly the only move. If you start with queen d7 check, you actually probably lose. But rook a2 apparently wins, and once again, don't ask me why, it's very, very bizarre to my eyes. So because of this, instead of knight f6, you go rook d8 first in this position, wait for white to play queen e2, and play knight f6 here. And play could continue something along the lines of knight e3, creating the threat of rook g1. If you go knight g3 instead, and allow rook h8, knight f5, king f8, black is just completely fine. So you go knight e3, rook h8, rook g1, queen f4, rook g2, knight takes e4. And in many cases here, black will win most of the material back, and a lot of the material will get traded off. And black, I think, might actually hold the resulting endgames. So knight g6 was a very, very decent alternative to bishop h3. But bishop h3 is also fine. White played bishop e5 check. Once again, there was an absolutely mad position after queen h5. Black goes bishop f2 check. You cannot take because queen takes d2 basically delivers mate. So you go king h1, black goes knight g6, you go knight f3, moving the knight away from the square where it was hanging, and you continue attacking the bishop on h3. And here, I'll just give you the evaluations. Black can play bishop d7 as if nothing happened, and this position somehow is a draw. Or black can just give the bishop up by playing queen f6, queen h3, rook f8, and this position is also a draw. And as I think is becoming the norm for these videos, I just have to shrug my shoulders and just tell you what the evaluation here is, because I don't think it's realistic for anyone to figure any of this out over the board. You just make moves and you hope your moves are good here, and you don't even bother yourself, frankly, with evaluations. But the point was not to play queen h5, of course. Duda played bishop e5 check. Black absolutely has to play knight f6 here, because if you play king h6, the bishop can go to f4. If the king returns to g7, now queen h5 just wins, because the knight on d2 has been protected, and the white attack overwhelms black very easily. And if after bishop f4 you go knight g5, a very simple move, knight f3, just picks up a lot of material. This knight is basically dead. So you have to play knight f6, white takes, queen f3 check, and this is where Kramnik just threw the game away. He was very, very short on time, but it's still a regrettable mistake, because you just need to see a reply to bishop f5, which is what he played, to realize how bad his position is. And in fact, rook d1 is very, very efficient, which is what Duda played. But also, let's say knight f1 here is more or less completely winning as well. So it's a bit of a regrettable mistake by Kramnik, because I think he could have arrived at I shall not play bishop f5 here by process of elimination. He should play king g7. King h1, knight g6 will transpose to something I will show you later. And white can try to improve his queen position by giving check, and then check from f4. King still goes to g7. And here you can choose between king h1 and king h2. If white goes king h2, you play knight g6, queen f7 check, you go to h6 here. It's important to go to h6, because if you go to h8, white can take this knight, and after queen h4 there is a very strong move queen g3, and white is more or less winning because black has to start trading. But after king h6, rook g1, black has only one good move in this position, but it is very strong. He goes bishop f5, protecting the knight for now, and also creating the threat of queen h4 check. Queen h3, black trades and goes rook f8. And once again, black is 2 pawns down, but the bishop on a7 and generally just all of black's pieces are so much better than the white pieces here that the machine suggests black is not even worse. And if white goes king h1 instead, you still go knight g6, but after queen f7 check, if you play king h6, you are now worse. I will just show you why, because rook g1, bishop f5 in this position, instead of what happened in the previous position, white has this new move rook g1, g2, using the fact that there is a square on h2 available to this rook. And black still has to self-pin himself like this, and white has a number of moves here which give him very promising endgames. For instance, knight f3, queen h5, and knight g1. But in this position, because the king is on h1, you can go king h8, white has to take, you go queen h4, and white can choose between two equal positions. One of them is queen g3 takes, and here, very big difference. You cannot take with the king, you have to take with the pawn, and black goes rook f8. And once again, black is so active here that he is just not struggling at all. It's impossible to stop the rook from arriving on f2 for white, or at least impossible to do it properly. And if white goes knight f3 instead, there is an immediate draw available to black with bishop g2 check, queen takes f2, queen takes f3, and you can even take on e4 here. And this position, once again, according to the machine, is a draw. But instead of all that, Kramnik, as mentioned, played bishop f5. He was very, very short on time, though. And after rook d1, you can more or less resign, because there's never any checks from g8. The bishop controls that square, and the bishop is just dead on f5, and white will even continue with the mating attack. Kramnik played queen c8. If you play queen d7 instead, white can even go knight f1, let's say queen e8, knight g3, and continue giving mate. Totally lost position for black. After queen c8, the most sadistic thing Duda could have done here would have been to play ba6, with the point that after b takes a6 and let's say e takes f5, there will be variations in which the rook on a8 is hanging. And there's also this move rook d1, e1, which once again just shows to black how helpless he is to deal with the threat of, let's say, e takes f5 followed by rook e6 check. Once again, more or less a resignable position. But Duda, who also had a very little time available, just simply took on f5, queen f5, knight e4 check, king g7. Here, once again, the machine says you can play queen g2 check, queen g6, and knight g5, and it is still white who is giving mate, and probably will actually eventually give mate here. But the decision by Duda to take on f5 and go rook d7 check should not be criticized. It's still completely winning for white. King h6. Here he could have taken on c7. I think it was stronger than what he played, because the pawn on b7 basically also falls. He chose to take on a6 and take on c7. I suspect he thought he was winning on the spot here, missing that there's a move bishop b8, which kind of preserves all the pieces, at least for the time being, because you cannot play rook c8 because of bishop h2 check. But game just continued. Rook f7, king h4, rook f6, king g7, and Duda quietly optimized his pieces, played king f1, rook b6 here, put the bishop on a good central square, knight g6, c4, bishop d4, c5. Here they reached the time control, and white is quite clearly winning. Knight f4, and a very good technical decision. Bishop b7, knight d3, and simply bishop takes a6. We were making an argument for rook d6, which also wins on the spot, of course. But bishop takes a6 is a very good decision, because you can also trust Kramnik to understand that the position after knight c5, bishop c5, and rook b7 check is just completely hopeless for black. Because the pawns are far enough away, and the a-pawn is of the correct color with the light squared bishop. For black to more or less simply resign here. There's just never any chance of holding this position for black. In view of that, Kramnik took on c5 with the bishop. White played rook e6, knight f4, knight takes c5. The position after knight e6, king f6, knight c5 is completely lost. So Kramnik played rook c7 instead and resigned after rook e4, where he is basically just a full piece and 2 pawns down. This concludes my somewhat preliminary analysis of a very complicated game. Jan-Krzysztof Duda won against Vladimir Kramnik. Very interesting game, which might also have a lot of theoretical importance. And in terms of the tournament, very important victory for Duda, obviously. Very nice to be a player as strong and as legendary as Kramnik. But for Kramnik, this continues a really difficult tournament. You can admire his spirit and the way he plays for a win every game without really stopping, but 2 out of 8 is not what we're used to from him, and it must be very painful for him to not have any success with the chosen mode of playing. Tomorrow is the rest day in Wijk, so we will return with our coverage of the tournament on Tuesday, same time, 1:30 Central European. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all watching our live shows with Jan Gustafsson, which we will continue for all the remaining rounds as well. Thanks for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.